When you finally go silent, something powerful begins, something they never expected, something they never prepared for, something they can't control. That silence becomes the mirror they fear the most, reflecting every insecurity they've spent years hiding beneath charm, manipulation, and carefully crafted illusions. And whether they admit it or not, your silence awakens thoughts inside a narcissist that unravel them day by day, piece by piece, mask by mask, because silence is not emptiness. Silence is pressure. Silence is confrontation. Silence is truth. And a narcissist feels it louder than any words you could ever speak. Silence becomes the narcissist's greatest fear because it removes their control, their influence, and their ability to manipulate your emotions. To understand the full weight of this, you have to imagine how deeply a narcissist depends on reactions, your reactions. Everything they build, every illusion they maintain, every mask they wear is structured around the certainty that you will respond, that you will explain, that you will defend yourself, that you will question your worth when they push you, praise them when they pull you in, and seek their approval even when they give you none. Your words were never just communication to them. Your words were fuel. Your emotions were evidence that they mattered. Your responses were proof that they still had power. So when you go silent, you don't just stop talking, you shatter the foundation they stand on. Silence cuts in a way your voice never could. When you argued, they felt important. When you cried, they felt powerful. When you tried to fix things, they felt superior. But silence tells them something they never want to hear. They are no longer the center of your emotional world. Silence takes away the mirror they use to reflect their own worth, because a narcissist doesn't have stable self-esteem. They rely on others, especially people they once controlled, to feed their sense of importance. Your silence interrupts that supply, and when the supply is interrupted, their confidence begins to crack. At first, they pretend it doesn't bother them. They tell themselves you're just being emotional or dramatic. But beneath that surface, silence triggers their oldest wound, the fear of being insignificant. Narcissists need constant validation, even if it's negative. They want your frustration, your questions, your confusion, anything that proves they still affect you. When they get nothing, their mind starts racing. They begin to feel a loss they can't define. They don't feel sad in a healthy way. They feel panic in an ego-driven way. Silence forces them into an unfamiliar space, one where they aren't in charge, where they don't dictate how you feel, where they don't control the narrative. They start questioning themselves, but not in a reflective or responsible way. Instead, they question their grip over you. They wonder if someone else now has your attention. They wonder if you've finally seen the truth about them. They wonder if you've grown stronger than they expected. A narcissist believes they are unforgettable, irreplaceable, and always one step ahead. Your silence challenges all of that. It forces them into a world where they can't predict your next move. And unpredictability is like poison to their ego. They need you to be reactive so they can stay in control. They need you to speak so they can twist your words. They need you to care so they can take advantage of that care. Silence does the opposite. Silence takes away the battlefield. Silence gives them nothing to use. Silence leaves them standing alone with their own thoughts, the very thing they run from. Narcissists hate introspection, because introspection exposes their emptiness, their insecurity, their fragility. When no one is supplying them with emotional energy, they are forced to confront themselves, and that confrontation is terrifying. They begin searching for explanations that protect their ego. They blame you. They blame others. They create stories in their mind to make themselves feel superior again. But none of it quiets the discomfort, because your silence keeps reminding them they are not in control. Every hour you stay silent becomes a message. Every day you don't respond becomes a consequence they didn't anticipate. They thought you needed their approval. They thought you couldn't handle distance. They thought you would always return, so when you don't, silence becomes a mirror they cannot escape. It shows them a version of reality where you have power and they do not. And that is their greatest fear. Your silence becomes the one thing they can't manipulate. It becomes the barrier they can't cross. It becomes the truth they can't rewrite. And as they struggle to regain the control they lost, they realize something they'll never admit out loud. Your silence is stronger than their entire strategy. While they are falling apart internally, you are rising. While they are losing their stability, you are gaining yours. Silence doesn't just remove their influence over you. It reveals your own strength. And that is why it scares them more than anything else. Day by day, your silence cracks their illusion of superiority, forcing them to confront insecurities they work hard to hide behind charm and manipulation. A narcissist survives on an internal fantasy of being above others, smarter, more desired, more powerful, more important. This belief isn't just arrogance, it's their defense mechanism. a shield they built long ago to protect themselves from feeling ordinary or vulnerable. Their entire identity depends on maintaining this illusion of being untouchable. But when you go silent, you do something that threatens the core of who they pretend to be. You stop feeding the illusion. You stop validating their power. And without that external reinforcement, their false sense of superiority starts to collapse from within. Narcissists believe they are always in control of the dynamic. They think they know exactly how to provoke charm or manipulate you into giving them whatever emotional response they want. In their mind, they are the puppet master and you are the predictable, reactive source of attention. As long as you respond, even if the response is negative, it confirms their belief that they matter more than you, that they have a psychological hold over you, that they are the dominant one in the connection. But your silence breaks that belief in a way that nothing else can, because silence is unpredictable, silence is unfamiliar, silence is powerful when used by someone who used to be controlled. At first, they try to convince themselves that your silence means nothing. They tell themselves you're just upset and will return soon. But as time passes, they begin to sense something deeper, a shift they can't name but can feel. It's the shift of power slipping away. The longer you stay silent, the harder it becomes for them to believe their own stories. They begin to feel smaller, less significant, less in control. The illusion they built starts to wobble. Narcissists hate seeing themselves as ordinary or replaceable. Your silence makes them feel exactly that. They begin replaying interactions, trying to recall moments where they felt superior, searching for reassurance that you were beneath them emotionally, but your silence contradicts those memories. It suggests that maybe you weren't as dependent as they thought, maybe you weren't as fragile, maybe you saw through them the entire time. And that possibility terrifies them because it challenges the narrative they built about who they are. The more silent you become, the louder their internal insecurities grow. These insecurities are always there, but they usually hide beneath arrogance, blame, shifting, and grandiosity. Silence strips away their distractions. It forces them into a space where they can't escape their own thoughts. They start to wonder whether they made a mistake in pushing you too far, not because they feel genuine remorse, but because losing control over someone threatens their identity. Their superiority is based on convincing themselves that people will always orbit around them. When you stop orbiting, the illusion cracks. They may try to regain their sense of superiority by imagining that you are missing them, that you are suffering without them. They may even create fantasies where you are still emotionally tied to them, where you're still weak, still attached, still waiting, but their own mind betrays them because if you were truly suffering, you wouldn't be silent. If you were desperate, you would have reached out, and the absence of your reaction becomes a constant reminder that they miscalculated your strength. As days pass, they begin to compete with the silence. They think of ways to pull you back, ways they used before, ways they believe will reestablish their dominance. They might plan a message, an indirect post, a dramatic gesture, or even a sudden disappearance meant to provoke curiosity. But none of these strategies feel certain anymore. Their confidence weakens. They are no longer sure these tactics will work. And that doubt eats away at the foundation of superiority they depend on. Your silence forces them to see the truth. They avoid their power over you as an illusion, too. They weren't stronger. You were just conditioned to react. They weren't smarter. You were just patient. They weren't superior. You were just giving them more influence than they deserved. When that influence ends, their imagined status collapses. Silence is not just absence. Silence is exposure. It reveals who actually held the power all along. A narcissist thinks they are above you until your silence proves that they never were. They thought they were the sun and you were the planet. But silence shows them that you were the light and they were the shadow depending on you to exist. Every day you remain silent, their illusion continues to crumble. Every day you don't respond, they lose another piece of the superiority they cling to. And every day you gain another piece of your freedom. A narcissist becomes trapped in denial, anger, confusion, and fear when you stop reacting because their identity depends on controlling your emotional responses. The moment you go silent, you interrupt a psychological system they rely on for stability. You might think your silence is small, simple, or passive, but to a narcissist, it is a threat big enough to destabilize their entire emotional structure. They have built their sense of self around the idea that they can influence you at will, that they can trigger you whenever they choose, and that they can predict what you will do next. So when you suddenly become unreadable and unavailable, it throws them into an emotional spiral they don't know how to manage. At first, they go into denial. They tell themselves you're just being dramatic or emotional. They say things internally like, They always come back or they'll break soon. This denial is a shield. They use it to protect their ego from the possibility that they may have actually lost control. Narcissists cannot handle reality when it contradicts their beliefs about themselves, so they start rewriting it. They convince themselves they are still in charge. They pretend your silence is part of a game or a temporary reaction. They refuse to consider that you may be done, that you may be stronger, or that you may have recognized your worth. Denial becomes their comfort zone, the place they hide from truth. But as silence continues, denial becomes impossible to maintain. That's when anger begins to rise. Narcissists feel entitled to your attention and your emotional energy, so when you stop giving it, they feel wronged, insulted, disrespected. Their anger comes from a place of wounded ego, not wounded heart. They're not hurt because they miss your love. They're hurt because they're losing access to your emotional responses. Their anger might be silent or explosive. They may talk badly about you to others, project blame, or create stories that make them the victim. They may even try to provoke you indirectly, hoping to break your silence so they can reclaim their sense of power. But underneath that anger, something deeper is happening. Fear is starting to form. Before fear fully sets in, confusion takes over. Narcissists believe they understand human behavior better than anyone else. They believe they can read people, manipulate emotions, and predict reactions. Your silence destroys that belief. They can't figure out what you're thinking. They can't calculate your next move. They can't determine whether you're hurt, healing, or done. This confusion eats at them because they thrive in situations where they feel mentally superior. Now they are left with questions they hate asking. Why aren't you responding? Did they lose their grip on you? Did someone else enter your life? Did you realize who they truly are? They try to make sense of your silence, but the lack of information frustrates them because they cannot twist or control what they do not understand. Confusion then merges with fear, the most uncomfortable feeling a narcissist can experience. Fear for a narcissist is not fear of losing love, it's the fear of losing control. Control is their oxygen. It's how they maintain their self-worth. When silence takes that away, they begin to panic internally. They fear that they have been replaced. They fear that someone else might now be giving you the attention they once took for granted. They fear that you may finally be seeing through their manipulation. They fear that they no longer matter to you. This fear is the beginning of their unraveling because it targets the core of their insecurity, the fear of being insignificant. As silence stretches on, these emotions begin cycling. They go back and forth between denial, telling themselves you still care, anger, resenting you for not reacting, confusion, trying to interpret your silence, and fear, realizing they may be losing their influence. They may try different strategies to regain control, love bombing, guilt tripping, or even disappearing to make you chase, but each strategy loses power against your silence, and every failed attempt deepens their emotional spiral. What they don't understand is that your silence isn't meant to create chaos, it's meant to create peace for yourself. But because they cannot comprehend emotional independence, they misinterpret your silence as a threat, an attack, or a betrayal. They think everything you do revolves around them because their world revolves around the idea of control. When that control slips away, they don't know who they are. Their identity is not built on inner strength, it's built on external dominance. Once that dominance is gone, they're left with the emptiness they've been avoiding their entire life. The truth is that narcissists feel the deepest emotional turmoil when they cannot manage someone else's emotions. Your silence traps them in their own mind, a place they avoid at all costs. Their thoughts become loud, unstable, and increasingly paranoid. They begin questioning everything not out of growth, but out of fear. They realize too late that the person they underestimated, the person they tried to control, the person they thought would always respond, is now the one in control simply by choosing not to speak. And that is why your silence doesn't just bother them. It breaks them in ways they will never admit. Nothing terrifies a narcissist more than the idea of being forgotten. And your silence forces them to face this fear with a level of intensity they are emotionally unequipped to handle. For someone who has built their identity on the belief that they are the center of your world, the withdrawal of your attention becomes more than a simple absence. It becomes a psychological threat. A narcissist does not fear losing love. They fear losing relevance. They survive on the idea that they cannot be replaced, that people will always return to them, that their presence leaves a mark no one else can overwrite. When you go silent, you challenge every part of that internal narrative. You introduce the one possibility they cannot tolerate, that they no longer hold a place in your mind. A narcissist's need for importance is not a desire, it is a dependency. They rely on the emotional reactions of others to feel alive, powerful, and superior. Without constant attention, their ego becomes unstable when you were giving them your energy, whether through love, arguments, tears, explanations, or attempts to fix things they felt significant. Even your pain made them feel relevant, because it proved they had influence over your emotions. But silence removes all evidence of their importance. It leaves them without the emotional proof that they matter. And this emptiness hits them harder than you may ever realize. When a narcissist starts to sense that you may be forgetting them, their mind begins to spiral. They picture you moving on, smiling, breathing freely without them. They imagine you healing, growing, or rebuilding a life where they are no longer a central figure. They imagine someone else entering your world, someone kinder, more stable, more deserving. These thoughts create a panic they struggle to hide. They will never admit this panic out loud, but internally their ego begins to collapse under the weight of uncertainty. Your silence becomes a battlefield where their insecurity fights against their pride. Their insecurity whispers, "What if you don't miss them? What if you've moved on? What if you finally see through them?" But their pride fights back, insisting they are unforgettable, insisting you will eventually return, insisting no one else could ever replace them. These two forces collide inside them, creating emotional chaos they cannot regulate. Unlike healthy individuals, narcissists have no inner stability. They depend entirely on outer validation. When that validation disappears, they feel as though they are disappearing too. Each day of your silence intensifies this fear. They begin monitoring your activity, your social media, your posts, your silence itself. They analyze every detail, looking for signs that you still think about them. They want to see sadness, longing, or struggle in your absence. But when they see nothing, when you remain unbothered, calm, or simply quiet, it shakes them deeply. They start to wonder if they were ever as important as they believed. This is not just an uncomfortable thought for them, it is an emotional threat. A narcissist's entire sense of identity is built on superiority. To be forgotten would mean being ordinary, insignificant, unremarkable, and that is unbearable for them. As silence continues, they may attempt to rewrite the story in their own mind. They might try convincing themselves that you are still attached, that you are pretending that your silence is fake. They create these stories not because they believe them, because without these illusions, they would have to face the truth that they were never as central to your life as they imagined. They depend on these fantasies to survive emotionally. Without them, they would be forced to confront the emptiness they've avoided their entire lives. Your silence threatens that empty space to surface. It exposes the truth they hide behind arrogance. They are terrified of being alone with themselves. Being forgotten means losing the mirror they used to see themselves. You were that mirror, reflecting back the importance they wanted to feel. When you stop reflecting, they stop existing in the way they want to exist. Your silence forces them to confront a reality they run from, the reality that people are allowed to walk away, and they cannot control everything. The fear of being forgotten becomes a shadow that follows them day after day. It grows with every moment you don't reach out, every day you don't respond, every hour you live without needing them. They begin to feel a sense of vulnerability they cannot tolerate because being forgotten feels like being erased. And for a narcissist, erasure is emotional death. In the end, your silence doesn't just remove your presence. It removes the version of themselves they created through you. And that loss terrifies them far more than losing the relationship ever could. Your silence forces a narcissist to question everything, their power, their control over you, and whether someone else has replaced them or strengthened you. For someone who believes they can read every emotion you have, predict every move you make, and mold your reactions to fit their needs, your silence creates a psychological disruption they cannot manage. A narcissist depends on certainty. They depend on predictability. They depend on knowing exactly how to trigger you, soothe you, or confuse you. When you become silent, you remove every tool they rely on, and suddenly the person they thought they understood becomes a mystery. That mystery becomes their obsession. At first, they try to comfort themselves with arrogance. They repeat the stories they have always believed, that you are weak, that you can't live without them, that you will eventually break in return. But the longer the silence stretches, the weaker these stories feel, and slowly doubt begins to creep into their mind. Doubt is dangerous for a narcissist because it threatens their constructed identity. They are not used to questioning themselves. They are used to questioning you. But silence flips the dynamic. It forces them to face possibilities they've never considered. They begin by questioning their power. They thought they had you emotionally trained, conditioned to respond, conditioned to explain, conditioned to chase. But now there is nothing on the surface for them to read. They don't know whether you're angry or indifferent, hurting or healing, waiting or gone. The absence of emotion becomes a louder statement than any confrontation. They start to wonder whether the power they thought they had was ever real, or whether it existed only because you allowed it. That question bruises their ego, because the idea that you might have been stronger all along is something they never want to believe. Next, they start questioning their control over you. A narcissist believes they can dictate the rhythm of the relationship, when it begins, when it intensifies, when it cools down, and when it ends. They believe they hold the final word, but your silence steals that control from them completely. Suddenly, they are waiting on you. They are watching for signs. They are replaying moments in their mind, searching for clues that explain why their usual strategies are no longer working. They may even start wondering whether you emotionally detached long before you went silent, and that possibility terrifies them. Because if you detached quietly, that means they never noticed. And if they didn't notice, that means their control was never as strong as they believed. Then comes the fear that someone else may be replacing them. This fear slices deeper than anything else. Narcissists do not want you. They want to own your attention. They want exclusive access to your emotions because that access makes them feel significant. When they lose it, their mind immediately turns to the possibility that someone else now has it. They picture you laughing with someone else, opening up to someone else, trusting someone else. They picture someone giving you the stability and kindness they never did. They imagine someone appreciating what they took for granted. And that thought becomes a knife twisting into their ego, because narcissists do not compete, they dominate. The idea that someone else could be doing what they failed to do is intolerable. But the most unsettling thought of all is that you may have replaced them with yourself, that you have grown stronger, that you have chosen peace over chaos, and that you no longer need validation from anyone. This realization forces them to confront something they try to avoid: your strength. They start to wonder if the silence comes from empowerment rather than pain. This is the possibility that shakes them the most. They never prepared for a version of you that knows your worth, that sets boundaries, that no longer entertains manipulation. Their fear shifts from losing you to losing the control they believed they had over your emotions. As days pass, these questions intensify. They think about whether they pushed too far, dismissed too many moments, or underestimated your capacity to walk away. They replay the last conversations, analyzing what they missed. They think about the times you went quiet before, wondering whether those were warning signs. They even wonder whether you discovered the truth about them, truth they never wanted you to see. Silence becomes a microscope, forcing them to examine their own behavior, something they deeply resent. Your silence becomes a mirror they cannot escape. It reflects back the flaws they hide, the mistakes they deny, and the insecurities they refuse to acknowledge. Instead of controlling your emotions, they are now trapped in their own. Instead of questioning you, they are questioning everything about themselves. They feel unstable, fragile, insignificant. They feel like they are losing ground, losing importance, losing the version of themselves they believed was absolute. In these moments, they realize something they never expected: you hold the power now. Not because you fought them, not because you argued, not because you exposed their behavior, but simply because you chose not to respond. Silence becomes the truth they cannot manipulate. It becomes the force that shakes their identity. It becomes the reason they begin questioning everything they once believed. And the deeper those questions go, the more they realize that the person they thought they controlled is now the person they can no longer reach. Your silence becomes your strength, not because it is loud or forceful, but because it is finally free from the chaos that once drained you. Silence is not the absence of communication, it is the presence of self-respect. And when a narcissist loses access to your reactions, they lose access to the emotional fuel that once fed their ego. They lose the ability to pull you into their confusion, to twist your words, to turn your feelings against you, to make you question your reality. Your silence becomes your power because it breaks the cycle that kept you emotionally tied to their manipulation. Every day you choose not to respond, not to explain, not to defend yourself, you reclaim a piece of yourself they once tried to control. In the beginning, choosing silence feels heavy, almost confusing. You're so used to defending yourself, proving your innocence, justifying your boundaries. You're used to the arguments, the expectations, the emotional traps. The guilt they engineered inside you doesn't disappear instantly. But slowly, your silence begins to reveal something you never noticed before. You don't owe your peace to anyone. You don't owe your energy to someone who only valued you when you made them feel powerful. Silence becomes clarity. It becomes the moment you realize how many times you fought losing battles, how many times you tried to explain your heart to someone who never cared to understand it. Day by day, Your silence strengthens your emotional muscles. The less you respond, the more control you regain over your own life. The narcissist expects you to react, to chase, to beg, to seek closure, to keep the cycle alive. But when you don't, you walk away from the emotional battlefield they set up to win every fight. They cannot twist what you do not say. They cannot attack what you do not offer. Your silence becomes your shield, and through that shield, you begin to realize the truth. You are not powerless. You were conditioned to feel powerless. You were trained to believe that your voice only mattered when it served them. Silence shatters that belief. Silence teaches you that your peace, yours to protect. As the narcissist grows frustrated, confused, and angry with your lack of response, something else happens inside you. You start to feel lighter. You begin to think more clearly. You start making choices based on what is good for you, not what will prevent their next outburst. You begin to reconnect with parts of yourself that were silenced long before you went silent with them. You realize how much of your life you put on hold, how many dreams you delayed, how many emotions you suppressed just to maintain peace with someone who thrived on chaos. Silence creates room for healing, room for reflection, room for rediscovery. What once felt like weakness starts to feel like freedom. The same silence they used to punish you, you now use to protect yourself. The same silence they once used to confuse you, you now use to detach from them. This is the shift they never expected. Narcissists rely on emotional reactions. When you stop reacting, they lose the map that guided them through your vulnerabilities. And as they become lost in their own frustration, you find yourself again. You realize your voice is not gone. It is simply being saved for someone who deserves it. You realize that choosing silence is not giving up. It is choosing yourself. It is choosing peace over drama, clarity over confusion, and self-worth over manipulation. Your silence also becomes a mirror that forces you to see your own resilience. The longer you remain silent, the more you understand that walking away does not make you weak. Being misunderstood does not make you wrong. Protecting your heart does not make you selfish. Silence becomes the moment you finally allow yourself to heal without interruption. It becomes the boundary you set not out of anger, but out of wisdom. You learn that not every battle requires your participation. Not every accusation requires your defense. Not every provocation deserves your response. As this strength grows, it changes the way you see everything. You stop waiting for closure from someone who would never give it. You stop trying to fix someone who never wanted to be fixed. You stop trying to prove your worth to someone who never valued it in the first place. Silence clears the fog they created around your self-esteem. Silence reminds you that you are capable of rebuilding your life without their approval, without their presence, without their validation. Your silence becomes the foundation of your next chapter, and slowly, the power dynamic shifts entirely. The narcissist loses control, but you regain your direction. The narcissist becomes confused, but you become awakened. The narcissist tries harder to provoke, but you no longer respond. You're not the same person they once controlled. You've changed, you've grown, you've stepped beyond the reach of their manipulation. Your silence didn't just free you from them, it brought you back to yourself. And that is the greatest strength you could ever carry forward.